My name is Stephen Deaton, and welcome to the Law of the Lord podcast, a production of the Newton Church of Christ in Newton, North Carolina. The aim of this podcast is to study God's Word for a deeper understanding and to see how it applies in our lives. Thank you for listening. We encourage you to search the Bible to see whether or not we are speaking the truth, because the Bible is the truth. It is the law of the Lord. In Genesis 47, verses 7 through 10, we read this. Then Joseph brought in his father Jacob and set him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How old are you?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage." So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. Jacob states that his days at 130 years old were few. And that's a remarkable comment, but that's in light of the days of his fathers who lived much longer. Think about Noah's life, 950 years. It's interesting that his life overlapped with Abraham's life. And then Shem's life at 600 years, this is of course Noah's son Shem, overlapped with Jacob's life. So the ones who had gone before him had lived much longer. But what we want to focus on is not the length of the days of the life of Jacob or of any other patriarch, but we're going to focus on the evil part of Jacob's comment to Pharaoh. He said his days had been evil. Now, his life was adventurous, if you will. He had conflict with his brother Esau and his father-in-law Laban. Jacob had trouble with his wives and seemingly unending difficulty with his sons, 12 boys who were prone to rash actions springing up from violent tempers. Still, Jacob was persistent in seeking God's blessings, specifically the Abrahamic blessings. Before we get into the study, though, please hit subscribe on your app, on the channel where you're listening, to be notified of new episodes so you can stay up to date. Now, let's study the law of the Lord together. The Old Testament patriarch Jacob was a man with his share of faults, particularly with deception. He was shrewd in trading a bowl of stew to his brother Esau in exchange for the birthright. He pretended to be his brother with his mother's help to secure the birthright blessing from his father Isaac. This led to Esau's passions exploding and openly expressing his intent to kill his own twin brother. Yet Jacob is hailed as a great man of faith. He had an objective of seizing the birthright for himself because he valued it. Unlike Esau, Jacob was focused on the promise of God and was willing to do what it took to obtain them, though in an unscrupulous way at times. While Esau was undisciplined and profane, Jacob was persistent in his pursuit of the Lord's favor. For this, the Lord rewarded him, including giving him the name Israel, or Prince of God. We pick up in our study of Jacob and Esau, the persistent and the profane, in Genesis chapter 28. And to sort of sum up Genesis 28, what we're looking at here is, in wake of Jacob's deception and Esau's plan to murder Jacob, plans were made to alleviate the situation. Jacob was sent to Haran to escape Esau's wrath and let him cool down, but also for Jacob to find a suitable wife that would honor the Abrahamic covenant and promises. Now, during his travel to time in and return from Haran, Jacob's life made a dramatic shift for the better. And we're going to see that as we go through this account. In Genesis chapter 28, beginning there in verse 1, it says, Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said to him, You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take yourself a wife from there of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may be an assembly of peoples, and give you the blessing of Abraham to you and your descendants with you, that you may inherit the land in which you are a stranger, which God gave to Abraham. So Jacob is being sent away here again because of Esau's wrath. Now, Isaac agrees with Rebekah. Rebekah has come up with this plan. Rebekah has said, he needs to be sent away. She was wearied over Esau's choices of wives and things like that. And so Jacob needed to find a wife from elsewhere because Esau had chosen a wife from the land of Canaan. In fact, multiple wives from the land of Canaan at this point. And that is Jacob, needs to go find a wife that is of the family and extended family, if you will, of Abraham, to avoid entanglements with the people of the land. Later generations would not be relatives fighting with each other, a temptation to compromise due to bloodlines and relationships and things like that. And so go find a wife from the land where our extended family lives. In fact, go find a cousin to be your wife, Laban's daughter. So his uncle, his mother's brother, Laban, would be the one he's to go to, and from among his daughters find a wife. So evidently they have some knowledge or reasonable expectation that Laban has daughters. Maybe there's been communication through the years, letters sent back and forth. We have no indication that Isaac and Rebekah went back to visit or that anybody from there came to visit down in the land of Canaan, but somehow they have this expectation. So he's given a charge. He's told, go and do this, and go to Padan Aram, the house of Bethuel. Padan Aram is Haran. They lived in Beersheba at this time. Now, Beersheba is in the southern part of the land of Canaan. It's down in that territory that Judah will eventually inherit, or part of the tribe of Judah's territory. And it is about 400 to 500 miles or so from there up to Haran. And depending on the path that's taken, one of the resources I saw said it could be 700 miles because, it's not a straight line between the two. They didn't have highways built at that time. They didn't even, of course, have the Roman highways. So there was a circuitous route from Beersheba up to Haran on the northern end of that great fertile crescent, if you're familiar with that. Now, the journey is estimated to have taken about 20 to 40 days. So you think about that. That's a very long journey. He's going to go on foot from one place to another. It's interesting how he ends up finding the right place. Maybe there were some roads that were common. We don't know that he ever took this kind of trip before. There's no indication whatsoever that Jacob had made a trip like this or made a trip to Haran at all. And so it's interesting that he's setting out to go there to a place where he had never been before. Now, he's to go again to the house of Bethuel, so he's going to have to inquire. We're going to see that unfold in the account here and make this trip to find this wife that his parents have directed him to go and find. Now, one of the things you want to keep in mind is the fact that Jacob is 77 years old at this time. So he's not been married, 77 years old, and his parents are directing him to go find a wife. We'll come back to that thought in just a little bit. But the blessing given to Jacob here by Isaac includes the change in Isaac's attitude. Just notice this. Remember, before in the account that Isaac was attempting to bless Esau, because Esau was his favored son, and he wanted to bless him with the birthright blessing. But here, he freely gives it to Jacob. Again, Genesis 28, 3 and 4, may God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may be an assembly of peoples, and give you the blessing of Abraham to you and your descendants with you, that you may inherit the land in which you are a stranger, which God gave to Abraham. So he's really restating the Abrahamic blessings that God had originally given to Abraham. He had also given them to Isaac, of course, but it's the idea of a great nation and to inherit that land there. Isaac is, at this point, fully on board. He acknowledged Jacob as the rightful heir, and he encouraged Jacob here. He worked to ensure the covenant promise was respected. So in Hebrews 11, this is an interesting tie-in with what's written in the New Testament. When you go to Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 20, as it's talking about these ancient patriarchs, it says there, by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. Now, you sit there and you go, well, wait a second. When he blessed Jacob, originally, when Jacob deceived him, went in with the goat's hair on his arms and the back of his neck and wearing Esau's clothes and claiming to be Esau when it was in fact Jacob, how could he be blessing him by faith? Well, we would agree he wasn't blessing him by faith. He wasn't intending to bless Jacob at that point. But when it was revealed that he had given the blessing to Jacob, and Esau is there begging for his own blessing, that Jacob realized, it didn't turn out the way I had expected. And here in chapter 28, he is with full knowledge and understanding blessing Jacob. And I would submit to you then that this is where the Hebrew writer has reference to, that he's blessing Jacob by faith. Now, let's make a little note concerning marriage here. It's such an important relationship. You back up to Genesis chapter 24, and it's the longest chapter in the book of Genesis, where Abraham had his servant secure a wife for Isaac, again from the house of Bethuel. So it was very important to Abraham, and he saw the significance of it and the need to find the right woman to marry his son Isaac. There's great detail in the words and the actions of the people in Genesis 24, and you can see all through that God's hand in the process. There is providence unfolding there to find Isaac the right wife, who of course is Rebekah. Now, Esau disregarded his relationship with God, and he was not concerned about who he married. In Genesis 26, 34, and 35, it tells us that he married women from among those of Canaan, and specifically to Hittite women. And so he was one that did not highly value that which God had stipulated, or that God desired, or his parents desired. His parents were grieved over it, as chapter 27, verse 46 says that Rebekah said, I am weary of life because of the daughters of Heth. And so she didn't want her sons to be married to these women outside the family. Now, in Genesis 28, verses 6 to 9, right after where we just read a moment ago with Jacob being sent away, it says that Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padanaram to take himself a wife from there, and that he blessed him. He gave him a charge, saying, you shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan, that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and had gone to Padanaram. Also Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan did not please his father Isaac. So Esau went to Ishmael and took Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebajah, to be his wife in addition to the wives he had. So he's trying to do better, and in a way he does a little better, but he still is not doing what his parents would have him to do, finding a wife from among relatives that were much closer relatives. You see, it's very important, as we said, who we marry. Younger people need to consider guidance from their parents. They also need to trust in the providence of God. Don't get in too much of a hurry to get married. Don't let your passions run away with you and you end up making a mistake that has a lifelong impact. So be wise, be thoughtful, be patient, be prayerful, and considerate, just as we see in the case of Abraham choosing a wife for his son Isaac, and how that servant was very prayerful in those things. But we want to press on thinking about Jacob, and some of these things are going to come back in Jacob's decision on who to marry as well. So we'll circle back to that. But Genesis 28, verse 10, we pick up here reading, and we want to notice this. Now Jacob went out from Beersheba, and he went toward Haran. So he came to a certain place and stayed there all night, because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of that place and put it at his head, and he lay down in that place to sleep. Then he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and its top reached to heaven, and there the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your descendants. Also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. And in you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you. Then Jacob awoke from his dream or his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Then Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had put at his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of that city had been Luz previously. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, If God will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set up as a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that you give me I will surely give a tenth to you. So, on his journey from Beersheba to Haran, he made it about 46 miles or so along that route, and stopped to rest for the night in a place that ends up being called Bethel. He had a dream here. In the New King James, it says ladder. Several translations say ladder. The idea is probably more like a staircase from earth up to heaven. And the angels of God were ascending and descending on this ladder or on the staircase. And God spoke in this dream, and he identified himself as the God of Abraham and Isaac. He repeated these promises, the land promise, the nation promise, and the seed promise, as well as saying that he would care for him and protect him and bring him back to the land of Canaan. He would do so in peace. So this is a pivotal moment in the life of Jacob as he's on his way away from his family, away from the life that he knew, to a land he was not familiar with, other than maybe being told about it and being informed family is up there and go up there. But this is a pivotal time in his life. It's interesting that Jesus referred to this in John chapter 1 as he was getting to know his disciples as various men were coming to him to follow after him. In John 1 and verse 51, it says, "Most assuredly I say to you, hereafter you shall see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." And you recall that this was with Philip and Nathanael, and Peter was there, Andrew. They're there with the Lord, and Nathanael is amazed that the Lord had seen him sitting under a tree earlier that day, and that was all confirmed. But it says here that you're going to see angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. What's that talking about? It's talking about the fact that God was in communication with Jesus. He was a recipient of heaven's message, just as Jacob in Genesis 28 was a recipient of heaven's message. Jesus is identifying himself with one who is receiving communication directly from God. But then also the fact that God was with Jesus. As he was with Jacob, he was with Jesus, watching over him, looking out for him. But then also, when the Lord promised Jacob to fulfill and to receive, if you will, the blessings of Abraham, that same thing was true with Jesus. And really, ultimately, Jesus being the seed promise, that would be fulfilled in him. It's interesting that Jacob, his descendants, not too many generations from here, grow into a nation and enter the land of Canaan and receive that land. And then Jesus is the one who fulfills that seed promise, being, of course, a descendant of Jacob. Now, that's another Bible discussion and study that can be drawn out in detail, which we're not going to do here. But it's just interesting that the Lord quotes and mentions Genesis chapter 28 here with these angels ascending and descending in this great dream that Jacob had. Now, when he awakes from this dream, from the sleep, it says that he praised God. He acknowledged God's presence. He commemorated the event, taking the stone that was his head and pouring oil over it. And so this was something that impacted him greatly. And Jacob committed himself to the Lord. When it says there that if God will be with me in Genesis 28, verse 20, it's really more of since the Lord will be with me. You know, if you're going to the store, then I'm going to go to the car wash. It's that kind of use of the word if. So since God is going to do this, then I'm going to be committed to him. And he committed his life to the Lord. He was not one from this point forward that you see that's grasping for blessings necessarily through his own scheming, though he has times of weakness and times of fault and all of that. He's beginning to grow and mature and to change, and it takes time for that to unfold. In fact, over the next 20 years of his life, he goes from this schemer to one who has a great faith and trust in God and yields to God's will. So he's trusting in the Lord to look after him, to take care of him, and to bring him back into that land of Canaan. And here he's devoted, he says, 1/10 of all that he has. So he's going to, if you will, give back to the Lord. He recognizes it comes from the Lord, and I will give to the Lord. I'll sacrifice for the Lord. Now, in Genesis chapter 29, we see that God's providence brought Jacob on his journey to exactly where he needed to be. In Genesis 29, verse 1, so Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. And he looked and saw a well in the field, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it, for out of that well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. Now all the flocks would be gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place on the well's mouth. And Jacob said to them, My brethren, where are you from? And they said, We are from Haran. Then he said to them, Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. So he said to them, Is he well? And they said, He is well. And look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. Then he said, Look, it is still high day. It is not time for the cattle to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go and feed them. But they said, We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and they have rolled the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep. Now, while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. Then it came to pass, when Laban heard the report about Jacob his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. So he told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, Surely you are bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. Now we'll pause there for just a second. Notice that when Jacob arrives at the well, it describes how that there are other flocks and other people, other people with their flocks at the well. The idea is in that country, they very often shared wells. They shared water. It was so vital, so very important, and they would cooperate in ensuring that they could all get the water that they needed, particularly here it says for their flocks. And there's a large stone over the well to protect the well. And they would water the flocks when all of the people arrive. So evidently there's a system, whether that's a daily system or they're on a rotation between wells or whatever. But there's evidently this agreement that they would not water until everyone showed up. Now, maybe that is because they want to ensure that no one's getting more than their share of water, or maybe it is that they need that many people to roll that big stone away. But here it is that Jacob, even though it's an unusual time of day, he arrives there and he moves that stone off of that well in order that the flocks can be watered. And that shows that even though he's 77 years old, that he has this tremendous strength. He still has health and vigor, if you will. So it's an amazing account here about just Jacob as a man. But he asked these people where they were from, and he was able to, I guess, orient himself as to, am I in the right place? Am I in the right area? Who are these people? Can they help me along my journey? Of course, they identify they're from here, and he knows he's in the right place. Asked, do you know Laban? Yeah, we know him. He needed to find the family of Laban. And they said, we know him. He's well. Oh, by the way, his daughter Rachel is coming to water the flocks right now. You see how God's providence is working in this? He had no idea that these people would know Laban, or that Rachel would show up, the daughter of Laban, the one that he ends up wanting to marry. But here he is, the right place, the right time. There's no miracle taking place. It's just the providence of God. Rachel, a shepherdess here, and again, Jacob moves a stone so that he can water Laban's flocks. He's doing a service to his relatives, to his cousin and his uncle here. And it says that he kissed Rachel. This is a greeting of joy, of happiness. This is a cultural greeting of his cousin. And he's overjoyed, of course. And Laban finds out about this, that Jacob had arrived. Now, one thing to note here, it had been 97 years since Rachel, or rather Rebekah, left Haran. 97 years. That's hard for us to think about, to wrap our minds around. Just trace out the timeline with me here. Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. That's Genesis 25, verse 20. Isaac was 60 when the twins were born. Genesis 25, 27. Jacob was 77, Isaac 137, when Jacob left for Canaan. That's calculated from Joseph's age when Jacob stood before Pharaoh. So that again, if you go to Jacob's age when he stood before Pharaoh, he was 130 years old, as we noted at the beginning of this episode. And you calculate out Joseph's age at that time and all of that. So essentially, you have 97 years. You can go and trace that out yourself if you desire at some point, or you can reach out and let us know, and we'll provide you the references. But be that as it may, 97 years, long time. You can imagine Laban's surprise when all of a sudden his nephew just shows up, kind of out of the blue. So after all that time, here's a relative. You can understand why Laban ran to meet Jacob. He was excited that he was there. He invited him to stay, and it notes there that he lived with him for a month and really worked for him for that month. Now, let's notice in Genesis 25, or rather 29, verses 15 to 20, what unfolds next. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. Now Jacob loved Rachel. So he said, "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." And Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Now we'll pause there for just a second. And notice that he had been there a month, and this is enough time for them to get to know each other a little bit. They know each other a little bit about their character. Laban certainly knows about Jacob's work effort and ethic here. And so he has some confidence in Jacob. And thus, when Jacob makes the proposal, it really is fairly simple for Laban to agree to it. But Laban saw the benefit of having Jacob work for him, and he wanted to incentivize him to stay. And that's why he proposes, what do you want? And he said, "Well, I want your daughter. I'll work for you for 7 years for her," because it says he loved her. Now, when Jacob showed up, remember, all he had was essentially the clothes on his back and the staff in his hand. When Abraham sent his servant to find Isaac a wife 97 years prior, remember that Abraham's servant had, I believe it was, 10 camels and lots of goods loaded on that, and he gave many gifts when he showed up. So Jacob's just showing up empty-handed. So it's something you can understand maybe why this agreement made sense to everyone involved, that Jacob is going to work for 7 years, providing labor and helping to increase the material possessions of Laban in exchange for his daughter's hand in marriage. And Laban sees this. He thinks it's a good deal and makes a statement, "Well, it's better for me to give her to you and your relative than one of the people of the land." And So there's the agreement that's reached. And it says the 7 years essentially flew by because Jacob just loved Rachel so much. Now, again, this is not some 20-something-year-old man who's just infatuated. This is a 77-year-old mature man who is madly in love, evidently, with Rachel. But let's pick up in verse 21 and see what happens here. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her." And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me?" And Laban said, "It must not be done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also for the service with which you will serve me still another 7 years." Then Jacob did so and fulfilled her week, so he gave him his daughter Rachel as wife also. And Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid. Then Jacob also went in to Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served with Laban still another 7 years. Wow. Imagine having to live through that as either Jacob, Leah, or Rachel. We don't have much sympathy for Laban, but these others who are involved here, there's a measure of sympathy for them for different reasons, from different angles and things like that. But the end of that first 7 years, Jacob reminded Laban of their agreement. Evidently, Laban's not in a hurry to get this done, but Jacob is. And Jacob upheld his end, and Laban needed to fulfill his part. He's reminded of that, and Laban then does his scheming. And he's probably actually been scheming from the very beginning. I mean, if you think about it, when he made the original agreement, Rachel was his younger daughter at that time, and Leah was the eldest daughter at that time. And if there is any validity whatsoever to, well, the older needs to marry before the younger, then he probably had that in mind from the very beginning, or maybe he thought about it along the way, seeing that Jacob served him well and benefited him greatly. And he's like, well, I'll hook him in another 7 years by giving him Leah to start with, or maybe it's a way for him to get rid of Leah, who didn't have many prospects, perhaps, and then also give him Rachel in the deal. In the overall deal, that is. But he put on a wedding feast. He takes Leah to Jacob. It obviously is at night. She is veiled as the custom was, like fully veiled, could not see her face. And Leah obviously is cooperative in this. Now, you have to wonder, where was Rachel? During this wedding feast, did they have her locked up somewhere? Have they sent her away with the flocks? Or, I would think she was expecting that this would be her marriage feast. Or maybe she's already been informed, hey, here's what's going to happen, here's how it's going to go down, and you just need to stay quiet and not tell Jacob ahead of time. We don't know. It's not given to us. But Jacob and Leah are married. It's not because of the sexual intimacy, but it's the social custom of marriage and the feast, the ceremony, and everything combined with that. Now, what does Jacob's surprise over finding Leah next to him in the morning tell you about his relationship to Rachel? Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about why is it that if they are together that night, he doesn't know that it's Leah and not Rachel? Well, the reason that you have to draw on this is the fact that he was not intimately familiar with Rachel. They did not have a physical familiarity with one another to the point that he would detect at night that it was Rachel, or that it was Leah instead of Rachel. So you think about that, what that says about the purity of their relationship during that 7 years. That's commendable. That's something to be applauded, if you will. So Laban then gives the excuse, well, the custom is the older has to marry first and then the younger, and all of that. And so that's how he excuses it to Jacob, and then says, well, let her have her week. So give her honeymoon, so to speak, and then I'll give you Rachel, and you can work another 7 years for me. Well, that's exactly what happened. They agreed to it, and you see here what's happening is Jacob is looking to complete the deal, but his father-in-law has schemed in a way and used his daughters as pawns or as tools to get something to his advantage. Jacob accepted the situation. Rachel and Leah evidently go along with the situation. May not really have had much of a choice, but here we are. It's interesting to note that Isaac, Jacob's father, favored his firstborn and schemed to benefit him. Laban was working to benefit his firstborn daughter. Now, Jacob schemed and deceived to supplant the firstborn's rights. He deceived to gain them. Now, Jacob deceived a blind man, his father, who could not see, and Laban blinded Jacob with the darkness of night and the veil. So it's so interesting to see how what Jacob had done in his younger days, how it came back to him at this time. Laban set up his daughters, though, and his grandsons for a lifetime of rivalry. So what Laban's doing here selfishly ends up hurting his daughters and his grandchildren. It's so sad. Sometimes we don't have foresight to see how our selfish actions today can have consequences for years and years to come on those we presumably love and care about. Something else I think is worth considering. God's hand is involved in all of this. It's hard to imagine that Leah was not the intended wife of God's choice, just as Jacob was the intended heir. Okay, in spite of what men were scheming to do, Jacob ended up getting the birthright blessing. And in spite of what men were scheming here, Leah ends up being the first wife of Jacob, really the legitimate wife of Jacob. And the reason I say that is, look at what happens going forward, that Leah is the one that gives birth to the sons to begin with, and she has as many sons herself as the other three women have combined. She's the one that gives birth to Judah, and Judah, of course, is the one through whom the Messiah is going to come. And Leah is the one that Jacob is buried with. So you just think about, it seems that God intended Leah to be Jacob's wife. But Jacob, in this account, you don't see him, no record here, no indication that he is calling on God to inform his decisions, to help him figure things out. He just sees Rachel, that the account noted was beautiful in form and appearance, that he evidently is looking on the outward and not giving consideration as much to the inward. And that just could unfold in all kinds of things concerning Rachel and taking the household idols later, and, her scheming and things. And so you just think about this, that there's a reason that Leah ended up as his first wife. But I'll leave that for you to think about, contemplate, to chew on. But the thing we do want to notice is now that Rachel, while she's noted as being beautiful, that Leah was the one who was fruitful. So Genesis 29, verse 31, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she stopped bearing. So Jacob favored Rachel over Leah. It's not specified exactly how that was shown, how that was manifested day to day, but God recognized it, and God acted on Leah's behalf. God's favoring Leah and made Leah fruitful and Rachel barren. So Leah gives birth to 4 sons. So you think about this great blessing that she has and how she responds to it, again affirming that Leah was a more spiritually minded, more God-oriented woman than Rachel. Because look at the names, or how she describes this here. Again, in 29 verse 32, the Lord. And when it says Lord there, it's Jehovah Lord, the Lord of Abraham, the one true God that she is acknowledging and praising for this blessing. She mentions him again in verse 33 with the birth of Simeon, and then with the birth of Judah, praise the Lord. And so she is very much aware and acknowledging God's hand in giving her sons and allowing her to bear these sons for her husband, Jacob. It's kind of sad, though, that she thinks because I'm bearing these sons that Jacob's going to turn his favor to me. So while there are commendable things about Leah, she has this jealousy issue going on with her. And, it's not that we're standing here and saying, there's no cause for it. Just saying that it's a struggle for her, that she sees that her husband favors his second wife and not his first wife, that she's really not been wanted, so to speak. That's her experience. So in chapter 30, then, it gets into a whole lot of other things about these wives and the rivalry between them. And it begins there. Remember that Rachel recognized that she wasn't having children. Her sister's having all these children. So she gives Bilhah, her handmaid, to Jacob and says that he needs to bear children in that way. And Jacob's anger, verse 2, is aroused because Rachel had said, give me children or else I die. And Jacob's response is, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? I mean, this is causing very real trouble in the family. And it does reflect, in part, the importance of childbearing, of families, the blessing that is. in the life of a husband and wife, and to have children, to build out a home and all of that. But we'll leave that aside for right now. But she's complaining about it and, says, lest I die. That's kind of like Esau, right? When he didn't have food coming in from his hunt. Well, I'm just going to die if I don't have something to eat right away. And he ate a bowl and he took off. So he wasn't about to die. And Rachel wasn't about to die either. She was fine. She was fine. Emotionally, she's distraught, but physically, she's fine. So she gave Bilhah to him and figures, well, I'll have children through Bilhah. And that ends up happening. And Bilhah has a child, and it talks about bear a child on my knees. That just has to do with the adoption of a child. That's how they would describe it. And notice that Rachel named the children. And so her naming the children reflected the fact that she was the one who had authority here, not her handmaid. Her handmaid's just really a surrogate for Rachel. Kind of sad. You got to feel sorry for Bilhah and Zilpah and their precarious predicament here. But when this happens, then, of course, Leah responds in kind and gives Zilpah to Jacob and begins to have children by Zilpah. And then Leah bore more children. In the latter part of the chapter, she negotiates for a night with Jacob, and just all kinds of crazy things going on here in this rivalry. And then finally, Rachel gives birth to Joseph in Genesis 30, verses 22 to 24. Now, after those first four, it seems a little more unclear exactly the birth order. And remember, these boys are being born in relative quick succession. And it may be that even the first four, they're overlapping with some of these, but they're kind of grouped together with the mothers who are giving birth to these children. And we'll get to that hopefully later. There's a relatively short time span here with 11 sons being born in about 7 years. You have the time of the marriages until the request to leave is what we're talking about here. So remember, Jacob shows up. He says, I'll work for Rachel for 7 years. Then he's given Leah. There's a week time period, then he gets Rachel. So Leah and Rachel begin to have children, and he works for Laban another 7 years. At the end of that 7 years, we're going to read where he requests to leave, and that's after all these boys have been born. So he's had 11 sons by 4 different women in a 7-year time period. So there's only 7 years between Reuben and Joseph. So there's not a lot of time between it. In this next section, we read that Jacob agreed to work for Laban in exchange for wages. He's been working to survive this whole time, and now it's time for him to gain his own material possessions, because he worked for 7 years to get Rachel, which he didn't get her. He got Leah. And then he worked another 7 years to get Rachel, and he's got her. But he's not been working for wages up to this point. So in Genesis 30 and verse 25, it says this. And it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you. So he has no property in Padan Aram. He's dependent on Laban at this point for his sustenance, no material wealth to provide for his large family. He wants to go back to his land, to Isaac, where he has possessions there, right? He's going to inherit from his father. He has the birthright. He is now in the position of number one, which means between himself and Esau, Isaac's possessions would be divided into 3. Jacob would get 2 portions of that, and Esau would get 1 portion. And so he wants to go back where he knows he has things to take care of his family and be quite a wealthy man, which he was not there under the thumb of Laban. But 27, notice what happens. Laban said to him, "Please stay if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake." Then he said, "Name your wages, and I will give it." So Jacob said to him, "You know how I have served you and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming, and now when shall I also provide for my own house?" So he said, "What shall I give you?" And Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. If you will do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep your flocks. Let me pass through all of your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. So my righteousness will be answered for me in time to come, when the subject of my wages comes before you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the lambs will be considered stolen if it is with me." And Laban said, "Oh, that it were according to your word." So Laban convinced Jacob to stay and to work for him. Laban saw the prosperity brought by Jacob. He attributed it to Jehovah's blessing of Jacob. In the ESV, it says that he had learned by divination. And so there's an alternate translation that says, Laban may just be an outright idolater. But he tells him to name his price. Of course, it's understood within reason. Name your price. And Jacob struck a very shrewd deal here with his father-in-law. He reiterated the prosperity that he brought and noted that he needed something for his family. And they end up reaching an agreement. Laban tries to frame it as, "What am I going to give you?" Jacob's retort to him, "Well, you're not going to give me anything. I'm going to earn it. I work hard for it. So these are my wages, if you will." And he struck this deal where he's going to get the least of the flocks, the least desired, the least in number, as things would typically go. And so he culls these out, the spotted and the colored ones, and he says, "Those are going to be mine, and you keep yours." So Jacob says, "I'm going to conduct myself uprightly in this deal, and I'm not taking anything that we've not agreed to is mine." And so Laban then took control of the deal. In verse 35, it says that Laban had removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, the female goats. He's the one that's wanting to sort all those things out and not let Jacob get in there and, monkey with things, if you will. And he separated Jacob's animals by 3-day journey and put them in the care of his son. So he put Jacob's animals away from Jacob, and Jacob continued to look after Laban's flocks. So Laban's trying to stack the deck against Jacob, but Jacob prospered greatly. Now, in verses 37 to 43 of Genesis chapter 30, it gives us a picture here of what's going on with this use of the rods and putting it in the water and, them doing all of that. And then the speckled, the spotted and all of that they have many more. They're become the majority of the flock. Well, it's either unrecorded revelation from God that made the use of the rods a requirement for prosperity, similar to marching around Jericho or, things like that. But there's no biological or physical basis, but simply a test and demonstration of faith, maybe, is what's going on here. But however that is, Jacob attributed his prosperity to God in Genesis 31, verse 9. "So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me." So God's hand is in this, and we don't have to explain all the details, and we don't have to think today that somehow we could put rods in front of flocks and, manipulate the breeding of them. That's not what's going on here. God's hand is at work in all of this. So we'll leave that aside right now and look at the fact that Jacob, after a period of time, has decided to leave Laban because he realizes things are not ever going to be right here. In Genesis 31, verse 1, it says, "Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has acquired all this wealth. And Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not favorable toward him as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, Return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you." So Jacob saw a problem here, and the Lord gave him a command. Laban's sons are envious of Jacob. They believe Jacob took what was rightfully theirs, but that wasn't the case at all. Jacob had nothing 6 years previous, and he struck a deal that was readily accepted by Laban. Laban thought, oh yeah, I've got him now. Thought he was taking advantage of him. And the terms of the deal were repeatedly changed, as we see later in the exchange between Laban and Jacob. But here's the thing about it. Laban was not harmed in any way. The wealth that was there was created wealth. What wasn't there was now there. It's what the brothers wanted. It's not something that changed from the father's hand to Jacob's hand. It's what Jacob had been able to create in his work and labors, and to bring it about. The brothers saw that, and they wanted to take it back away from Jacob. He had not really stolen anything from their father. So Laban's countenance has changed. The brothers are upset. Laban's upset. He was happy for a time, but now he's against Jacob. Jacob could see it in his face. And, you sometimes can tell when people have changed their mood, their attitude towards you, that they get a certain look about them. Well, the Lord then told Jacob to return to Canaan. Return to the land of your fathers, the land of Abraham and Isaac. Return to your family. And he said, I will be with you. Just like he had told him when he left the land of Canaan that night at Bethel, I will be with you, Genesis 28:15. So it's time for you now to go back. Well, Genesis 31 verse 4 says this. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field to his flock, and said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not favorable toward me as before, but the God of my father has been with me. And you know that with all my might I have served your father. Yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not allow him to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled. And if he said thus, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock from your father and given them to me. So Jacob states his case of faithful service to his wives. Laban's against me, but God is for me, and that's why all this has happened. And he served Laban with all his might. He did his very best job, and he served him well, and he had blessed Laban greatly, tremendously. But Laban has deceived him and changed his wages time and again. So Jacob has a cause here, and he's explaining that to his wives about what it is. He's trying to get them prepared to understand this is why we're leaving. Now, verse 10. And it happened at that time when the flocks conceived, that I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the flocks were streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. Then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob, and he said, Here I am. He said to him, Lift your eyes now and see, all the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray spotted, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the Lord, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, and where you made a vow to me. Now arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family. Now, something I just want to note there, that this message to Jacob was revealed in a dream, which he had had a dream before and received a message at that time. But God saw Laban's injustice, and he overruled it. And he reminded Jacob that he was the God that spoke to him at Bethel, where Jacob took a vow. So he reminds him of his vow and tells him to return to the land of promise. But what this also helps us to understand is God had not been continually talking to Jacob throughout his time in Haran. This was the second time, as far as we know, that God is giving him a direct message. It's very interesting because sometimes people have the idea that patriarchs, that people in the Bible, that prophets in the Bible, they're just having conversations with God every day and God's speaking to them. And, just like two friends might meet up and talk about things each day. That's not what we read in the Bible. They receive communication from God on rare occasions. We just have it condensed into a compact form, if you will, because of the nature of what's written here, and we get the full accounting of God's working among men. But back to Genesis 31, verse 14. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, "Is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not considered strangers by him? For he has sold us and also completely consumed our money. For all these riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it." So Rachel and Leah agree with Jacob. It's time for us to go. They had hard feelings toward their father, and I think we can understand why. They had no portion in their father's house, or their father's basically treating them like strangers, not like his daughters. He doesn't have that kindness, that affection. I'm looking out for you. I'm thinking of your best interest. No, Laban is only thinking of his best interest. They said he has sold us. Well, brides usually received a part of the bride price, but they had not received anything. Laban kept all the prosperity, all the income to himself. He took from Jacob's labors that paid the bride price, and he spent it on himself, evidently. So his daughters are not pleased, and they recognize God's blessing to Jacob and God's justness in everything that is unfolded, and so they support Jacob in doing whatever God told him to do. So an outside enemy helped to unite these sisters. They had the rival over having all the children and stuff, but now they are together. They are on the same page because they have a common enemy against them, their own father. So Jacob now flees with his family. In verse 17, Jacob rose, set his sons and his wives on camels, and he carried away all his livestock and all his possessions which he had gained, his acquired livestock which he had gained in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's, and Jacob stole away unknown to Laban the Syrian, in that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. So he fled with all that he had. He arose and crossed the river and headed toward the mountains of Gilead. So Jacob loads up and takes off, while Laban's away. It was 3 days before Laban heard about it. And when it says that he crossed over the river, that's the idea. He crossed over the Euphrates River, and he was headed toward Canaan. Now, the next account that we read about is how Laban chased down Jacob and the family and was pretty hot about what had happened. But we can understand why Jacob did it, because his father-in-law would have pressured and bullied him to stay, and probably taken action, maybe violent action, to make him stay. So verse 22, it says, Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled. Then he took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night, and said to him, "Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good or bad." Now, isn't that interesting? That Laban gathers up a bunch of people to take off after Jacob, catches him after 7 days. So it's been about 10 days because he heard 3 days after Jacob had left and took him 7 days to catch him. So it's been 10 here. And this word pursued here is a military term. He's like an army going to hunt down the enemy and to fight them. But God warned Laban, do nothing good. And what does that mean? Why would God tell Laban not to do anything good to Jacob, say anything good to him? Well, don't bribe him, don't beg him, don't incentivize Jacob to return. And nothing bad, we understand that. Don't threaten him, don't harm him, don't attack either to force him back or his retribution. Don't do it. So basically, hands off, leave him alone. Now notice verse 25. Laban just is so full of himself, isn't he? It says, so Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, what have you done that you have stolen away unknown to me and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword? Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and songs, with timbrel and harp. And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly in so doing. It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. And now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. With whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of our brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent, and into the two maids' tents, but he did not find them. Then he went out to Leah's tent, out of Leah's tent, and into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols, put them in the camel's saddle, and sat on them. And Laban searched all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of women is with me. And he searched, but did not find the household idols. So you have this incident, Laban's complaining. He's angry about taking the family away, doing it secretly. You're disingenuous about all of this. He was disingenuous about sending away with a celebration. He had the ability to hurt Jacob, but had been warned not to do it. So you see, he had these intentions. And Jacob's instinct was right. I just need to go. Now, the thing that he does bring up that has a measure of legitimacy to it is you took the household gods. Of course, stolen gods, just the thought of that is a joke, right? How do you steal someone's god? Well, that's no god that you can steal. But he said, you've taken them. Of course, Jacob had not taken them. He didn't know they had been taken. It specifically says he did not know that Rachel had taken them. But these household gods could have been a number of things related to them, either thinking that they do have some type of power and all of that. It could be that they indicated an heir and gave you certain rights in the household. It could be out of spite that Rachel's taken them just to stick it to her father because she's mad at him. But whatever the reason is, they did belong to Laban, and someone in Jacob's company had taken them. But of course, it tells us about how that as he searched for them, he didn't find them. Rachel had them. She hid them, giving an excuse. The manner of women was with her, and so she couldn't get up. But what all of this is doing is you see that the household gods were doing nothing for Laban. In fact, Laban was watching over his household gods while Jehovah was watching over Jacob. Just a great contrast here between true gods, the true God, and false gods. Now, notice Jacob's response to Laban now at this point. Then Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, "What is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? Although you have searched all my things, what part of your household things have you found? Set it here before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried their young, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by beast I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. In the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night." So he laid out his case of faithful service and of Laban's misdeeds. This went beyond customary arrangements to ensure that Laban lost nothing. He didn't even mention in this case the deceit of Laban in giving his daughters to Jacob. He left that alone, but declared that God had been with him, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, the great and awesome one who dealt with his father, was now dealing with Jacob and looking after Jacob in his life. Now, Laban protests this, but he sought a covenant. He, in verses 43 to 55, lays out an argument that these are my daughter, my children, which they were not. He was a broken man who was painfully protesting his plight, but he wanted to make a covenant of non-aggression. Essentially, it's you go your way and I'll go my way. Stipulations that he laid out for Jacob were, you need to treat my daughters well, you need to take no other wives, and not to go beyond the marker that they set up. And for Laban's, let Jacob go without any interference and not go beyond the marker that they set up. Now we get to a very interesting account in the book of Genesis, in the life of Jacob, where Jacob prepares to meet Esau. In Genesis 32, verse 1 beginning, it says, "So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, 'This is God's camp.' And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Then Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, 'Speak thus to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I have dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight.' Then the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, 'We came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him.' So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels into 2 companies. And he said, 'If Esau comes to one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape.' Then Jacob said, 'O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, return to your own country and to your family, and I will deal well with you, I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. For I crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother and from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. And you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude.' So the angels met Jacob here to reassure him. He's anxious, obviously, over meeting with Esau, but they want to reassure him, God is with you. Jacob humbled himself and appealed to God for help as this account unfolds here. He says when he sends a message to my lord Esau, that means, you are superior to me. I know that you rule this area, this territory. You have some power here where Esau lived. But he says, thus says your servant Jacob. He's coming to him in a very lowly position as a servant. And he conveys in this message, I have plenty of possessions. I'm not here to take anything or to ask anything of you. And when the men come back, I would be shocked at this. Well, we talked to your brother Esau. We gave him that message, but we need to let you know he's coming here with 400 men. And Jacob, seemingly, rightfully, or understandably, we should say, understandably thinks, Esau's coming to attack me. That's what it looks like. I better be ready. So he prays to God, first of all. Notice that that's his action now, to appeal to God for help in a time when he is afraid. And he says he feared Esau and recognized his dependence on God, and expresses that humility that he had there, that, I need your help, God. So one of the things he ends up doing is sending gifts to Esau. When you get down through the rest of that chapter, down through verse 21, it talks about how he sends over presents, 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels, their colts and cows and bulls and donkeys and foals. So he's got a whole lot if this is what he's sending over as a gift. But we can understand he's trying to smooth things over, because when he left, Esau wanted to kill him over stealing that birthright blessing from him. So he's very unsure of what's going to happen here. But he's putting his trust and his faith in God while taking a measure of practical measures to try to ensure somebody survives. But notice the next thing. And here's the thing that really kind of pulls it all together in the life of Jacob. And that is when he wrestled with God. So Genesis 32:22. And he arose that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford Jabbok. He took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So he said to him, what is your name? He said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked, saying, tell me your name, I pray. And he said, why is it that you ask about my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Just as he crossed over Peniel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. Therefore, to this day, the children of Israel do not eat the muscle that shrank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip in the muscle that shrank. This is an actual event. It's fascinating, isn't it? Now, is this a test by God? A test to see about Jacob's continued determination? Because he's 97 years old at this point. We read just a little bit ago how he served for 14 years for the daughters and another 6 years, and he had gone up there at 77, so 77 plus 20, 97. He's 97 years old. Are you still just as determined as ever? Is that a test that God's giving to him? Is it helping to prove to Jacob that he's not a broken old man who had given up? It tells us that for sure. He's still determined, still a very strong and vigorous man. Was this a warning? Is this a warning that God can cripple you in an instant? So respect God, respect his power. Was this a lesson about his future? That the way you prevail is only with God. And you can face things that handicap you, but still go on. You have the strength to do it and to press on. Well, in this struggle, in this account, God blessed him with a new name, Israel, Prince of God. He's starting a new chapter in his life here. And he's amazed that he lived after seeing the face of God, so to speak, as Willis points out in his commentary. And he would live after seeing the face of Esau too. Now, here's a lesson I want us to think about. How do you prevail with God? It's not through your own self-centered efforts. It's not through your own power and might and struggle, but it's through humbling yourself and giving yourself to God's control and will, trusting in God to work things out, to do the right thing, and let the rest unfold. You see, when Jacob struggles, he's seeking what's good, he's seeking what's right, but it brings difficulties, troubles, heartache. And there's going to be difficulties, troubles, and heartaches in all of our lives. I understand that. But notice that he had this determination in him that he wanted God's blessing. That persistence in him is what makes him a great hero of faith. Esau did not have a determination and a persistence. Jacob did have that in his life, and we see that here, that in spite of the fact that he was in tremendous pain, his hip joint is out of socket, that he is not going to let go. And we have to be just as determined to receive the blessing of God. Not that we're fighting against God, not that we're struggling against God, but that we are going to hang in there in spite of how it may feel, how painful it may be, how intense that struggle is, that we're going to hang in there until we get that great blessing from God. Now, I'm not saying that we're foolish and stubborn and, shallow and materialistic, and I want a house from God, or I want a car from God, or I want even health from God, and I'm just going to be stubborn about that and insist on that's what God gives me. No, we want the spiritual blessings that God has to offer. And God will willingly give us those things. That's what we need to understand and recognize, but we have to yield to Him. We have to submit to Him. But we have to hold on no matter how turbulent that ride may be. In James chapter 1, it tells us that we are to count it all joy when we fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. Let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. God allows us and even leads us into trials at times. He doesn't lead us into temptation. Okay, that's not what we're talking about. But into trials that help to refine us, to humble us, to draw us closer to Him, to make us more dependent on Him. And Jacob here is learning and has learned that lesson. He's dependent on God. You and I need to be dependent on it and just as persistent, that we would hang in there and be men and women of faith as Jacob was. Not like Esau, who is weak, selfish, materialistic, worldly minded, profane, not regarding the blessings of God, yielding to his physical cravings and desires. See, Jacob doesn't do that. Jacob doesn't yield to the physical, but holds fast to that spiritual side of things, those blessings that he sought from God. And that's exactly what you and I need to do. Next, in Genesis 33, we read of this reunion between Jacob and his brother Esau, one that he had been quite anxious about. In Genesis 33, verse 1, now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him were 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants. And he put the maidservants and their children in front of Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. Then he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to him to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Jacob is showing favoritism as he did with his wives before, as he does with his sons later. He's showing a measure of favoritism here, and I can't help but wonder how his wives and his sons felt in the way that he ordered them here. But we'll have to leave that for the moment and note the really upshot of this chapter, and that's this joyous reunion between Jacob and Esau. And Jacob bowed himself before him, as he's coming to greet Esau. He's showing great humility as he's approaching Esau. And he could not undo the past, of course, which none of us can undo the past. And this is a good example of how you approach someone after years of alienation, is simply to have a measure of humility and to approach them with kindness. And there are gifts that have been sent out, overtures of reconciliation that have been sent to Esau. Esau's coming with these 400 men, and so it's a rather intimidating situation. But Jacob presses on. He's persistent and pressing on to have this meeting with Esau. He doesn't turn around and go back. He doesn't try to avoid him here, but he does meet him, and he's rewarded. The only thing that he can do is apologize for the past. He cannot and did not give back the birthright. But when they meet, they have this great joy, this great love, this great kindness and care and consideration for one another. As again, it says there in verse 4 that Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. In other words, this is a wonderful blessing for Esau. Esau saw this as a good thing. And Jacob, of course, sees this as a good thing, as his brother has a kind disposition toward him. It's interesting in Proverbs chapter 16 how that the wise man talks about when we live for the Lord, there's a way in his working that he helps us out with our enemies. In Proverbs 16, verse 7, when a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. And it's not necessarily the idea that God somehow, works directly on the heart of our enemies and changes their attitude toward us, but more the idea that when we live in accordance with God's word, that we seek to please Him, we are going to conduct ourselves uprightly before others, and others will look upon us with favor, with a measure of respect, maybe, if not favor. And so the Lord is with His people. The Lord was with Jacob here, and Jacob's prayer was answered when he was seeking God's help in facing his brother Esau. So Jacob, through the rest of this chapter, it goes on to tell us about how, Esau had pressed him to allow men to go with him and to escort him, and Jacob is determined to travel alone, so he defers and he declines Esau's offer there. He ends up settling in Shechem, and that brings us to chapter 34, and we're not going to spend a lot of time in Genesis chapter 34 because it is heavily focused on Jacob's sons as well as his daughter, of course. But the chapter highlights for us that assimilation into the clans of Canaan was a very real threat to Israel and his descendants. And God did not want that. God did not desire that. And you have a series of moral failings among Jacob's sons. There are some people who question Dinah's actions, being out with the daughters of the land and wondering if she was involved in things she should not have been involved in. But we won't explore that and dig into it. Perhaps it is, perhaps it's not. But she was defiled by Shechem. She was abused by him, raped by him. And the brothers, of course, were rightly angry about that. Their father did not do anything about it, essentially. There was this offer by Hamor and Shechem that they would give each other their daughters and take each other's daughters for their sons, for their wives, and intermarry among these clans there. And so this was a very real and serious threat. Well, the boys of Jacob feigned agreement with this, but they put that condition of circumcision upon these men of the land. They readily agreed to it because they saw that by intermarrying with Jacob and his families that they would be quite rich. And so they did that. Of course, they were sore on the third day. Levi and Simeon went up and killed all the men of the city and took all the spoils and the possessions and things. And that's when it tells us in chapter 34 that Jacob was very angry with Simeon and Levi. And later, in the end of the book, when he's talking about his sons and the birthright blessings and all those kinds of things, that Simeon and Levi are passed over. So Reuben is passed over because he has a transgression. Levi and Simeon are passed over because of this incident here in chapter 34, and Judah ends up being the one who's designated. But we'll leave that there for right now. What we want to think about now is when you get to chapter 35, that Jacob returned to his roots. He's gone away to the land of Haran. He's been up there for 20 years. He's returned. He's met Esau. There's a joyful reconciliation and reunion there. There are troubles that arise with the people of the land that helps to keep Jacob and his family isolated from the people and not getting friendly, overly friendly with them and intermixing with them. And then in 35, God brings him back to where he originally was when he left. So Genesis 35, verse 1, then God said to Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there and make an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you fled from the face of Esau your brother. Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, put away the foreign gods that are among you, purify yourselves and change your garments. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, and I will make an altar there to God, who answered me in the day of my distress and has been with me in the way which I have gone. So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods which were in their hands, and the earrings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree which was by Shechem. So he's told by God to go back to Bethel. In part, this is God protecting him, taking him away from that area of Shechem, because Jacob was nervous about the vengeance after his sons had slaughtered so many men. With the people of the area joined together and attacked Jacob and his family and destroy them. So there's a measure of real concern here. But, of course, God is with him and God is directing him. And he's told to go back to Bethel, which would remind him of where he came from and to whom he owed his all. But he tells his people to put away all the household gods that were among them, all those foreign gods, it says. Now, this would include perhaps like Rachel and the gods that she had stolen from her father's house, but it would also include servants of his who might have brought some things from Haran with them. So it is that he tells them, look, we're all going to put these things away. We're going up to Bethel. We're going up to the house of God. And so you have to put those things away. So he's being a true leader here in directing his household and how they're going to honor the one true God. And they take those and they bury them. A great lesson there that we need to recognize God's care in our lives, his love, his blessings, his guidance, and determine that we're going to put things away that don't belong in our life. And that needs to be true for fathers. That needs to be true for mothers to be cooperative and supportive of this. That needs to be true for leaders in a local church and how that they're leading the people. They realize, look, there's changes that need to be made. Let's make those. And take those things and bury them, if you will. Or like Acts 19, there are people at Ephesus who have magic books that they take those things and burn them. And so, yes, some book burning is a good thing. Those evil things, those wicked things, those pagan things, those need to be gotten rid of. So here they are, they're burying these things. It's similar to what Joshua told Israel to do in Joshua chapter 24, verse 23, where they are to put the foreign gods away from among them. When Israel, remember, had come out of the land of Egypt, gone into the land of Canaan, and he said, you've got to put those things away. You need to serve God. That's right after that famous statement where he said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. He put that challenge, choose you this day whom you will serve. And we all have to make that decision in our life. And here in Genesis 35 is where Jacob makes a statement and declaration to his household, all who were with him. Verse 2 says that you've got to put these things away. And they complied. They did that. So God was with him. Verse 5, it says, and they journeyed, and the terror of God was upon the cities that were all around them, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. So Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him. And he built an altar there and called the place El Bethel, because there God appeared to him when he fled from the face of his brother. God put the fear of God in the people. It says the terror of God was upon the cities. And so after this incident with Levi and Simeon and slaughtering all the men, the people would not touch them because God's hand was in it. And God now affirms his promises in verse 9. Notice this. Then God appeared to Jacob again, and when he came from Padan Aram and blessed him, and God said to him, your name is Jacob. Your name shall not be called Jacob anymore, but Israel shall be your name. So he called his name Israel. Also, God said to him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your body. The land which I gave Abraham and Isaac I give to you, and to your descendants after you I give this land. So God reiterates these promises to him and reassures him of his place and his position. Your name is no longer Jacob, supplanter or deceiver, but your name is Israel, Prince of God. And I'm giving you the land that I promised to Abraham and Isaac. It says in verse 13, then God went up from him in the place where he talked with him. So Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him, a pillar of stone, and he poured a drink offering on it, and he poured oil on it. And Jacob called the name of the place where God spoke with him Bethel. Again, just reiterating the blessedness of this occasion and of this place, calling it Bethel, the house of God. There is a reassurance here that his descendants would inherit this land in spite of how things look now, in spite of the fear that he had had after the Dinah incident. There is a reassurance from God that all is well. You don't need to fear. You don't need to be concerned. The promises are still intact. I am still with you. I am still watching over you. And what a great and wonderful blessing that is. You know, God brought Jacob back to the land of Canaan, back to the very place where God first spoke to him in a dream with that ladder. You think about all that Jacob had gone through to this point. The death threat from his brother, the solo journey up to Haran, the dealings with Laban, the marriages to his daughters, and then having those handmaids given to him and all the rivalry and jealousy that was involved in that. The journey really running away from Laban chasing him down, wanting to do violence to him, but God was with him. He wrestled an angel. He faced Esau, the abuse of his daughter, the violence of his sons, the dangers of the people of the land. Yet here he was at Bethel, and he receives God's firm reassurance. What we see in this is that God keeps his promises. Remember, all the way back in Genesis 28, when God had talked to him with the angels ascending and descending on that ladder, or that staircase, if you will, God told him, I will bring you back to this land. And here he was, literally back in that land, the exact same place where he had left on his journey to the land of Haran. God kept his promise to Jacob, and Jacob had loved and served God through that time. However imperfect it was, he loved and he served God. In Genesis 36, then, there is a record about Esau and the family of Esau and everything like that. We're going to skip over that. In chapter 37, we begin to read about Joseph and his life and what unfolds with him. Our main focus, though, we want to put on Jacob himself. It says there in 37 verse 1, Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. And so it begins to tell us about Joseph. And really, chapter 37 through the end of the book is a lot about Joseph, and there's a heavy focus on him, but there's also a counterpoint in Judah and the behavior, the attitude, the actions, the character of Judah and how it grows over time in a favorable way. He becomes a better man through this. But remember in chapter 37 that jealousy among the brothers because of Jacob's favoritism toward Joseph. He made him that coat of many colors, which set him out as distinction. His brothers determined one day that they were going to murder Joseph because of this favoritism. They literally wanted to strip away that favoritism from him. They took that coat. They decided that they would not kill him. They were talked out of that by Reuben, but then they decided to sell him into slavery. So they sold him off into slavery. They take that coat back to their father, and they cover it in goat's blood and convince their father that his son had been devoured by animals. Now, they do it by implication. They don't spell that out, but that's the conclusion that Jacob reaches. And it says that he is distraught over this. Genesis 37, verse 35, all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him. His sons deceived him in this. And you can't help but to realize this is part of that you reap what you sow principle that's coming back upon him. He had deceived his father. He had shrewdly dealt with his brother. And here his sons are dealing with him in a deceitful way. And those brothers kept up the lie for 22 years. So Jacob lives with the idea and with the sadness and sorrow of having believed that his son was dead for 22 years. Though he was called Israel, he was still a faulted man. We understand that. You consider his favoritism contributed to his favored son's abuse and slavery. He lost his favorite son just like his mother lost hers. Both of them had a role to play in creating resentment and bitterness, envy, and mortal danger. Both lost their children for over 20 years or more. It's unknown whether or not Rebekah ever saw Jacob again. But here's the little point that we want to get out of this. And that is, parents have to fight showing favoritism to one child over another, because it will come back and bite the parents. It will cause them great sorrow and grief and hardship. It's not just that your child is going to be the target of abuse, which they will be. There will be rivalry and pain and hurt between the children when favoritism is shown, but the parent also is going to end up facing that sooner or later. So if you want to avoid that, then avoid showing favoritism among your children. Well, I want to press on now beyond that. We'll cover Joseph's story at another time. But remember that when he was sold off into slavery, that he ended up in Potiphar's house. Potiphar's wife pursued him. She lied about it. Joseph's thrown into prison. In prison, he interprets the dreams of the butler and the baker. He ends up being promoted because he interprets a dream for Pharaoh as well. And so he's made the governor of the land, because there's going to be these 7 years of plenty, then 7 years of famine. And because he had told Pharaoh about that, Pharaoh put him in charge of gathering the grain and all those things. And it's during this time that when the famine hits, his brothers end up going down to Egypt to buy grain. He recognized his brothers. And at that time, the first trip, Benjamin, his full brother, was not allowed to go because Jacob did not want to lose his new favored son. Well, the brothers go back to Canaan. They tell their father about the things that happened down there. They had not recognized Joseph. Joseph had given them all their money back. He had provided them with all the grain and everything like that. When the brothers tell Jacob of their experience, and they want to go back eventually, and he says, no, you can't take Benjamin. Well, they say, well, the man, and that's Joseph, that we talked to said we couldn't come back unless we bring our youngest brother. Well, finally, Jacob relents to that. The brothers, along with Benjamin, go back. Joseph ends up revealing himself to his brothers, and there's a great and sweet reunion in that, and a beautiful account of Judah and how that he makes an impassioned plea on behalf of Benjamin and offers himself. And so he's had a complete turnaround. But when Jacob reveals himself to his brothers, Then his brothers end up returning to the land of Canaan and telling all these things to their father. And that's where I want to pick up in Genesis 45 and verse 25. Then they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father, and they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart stood still because he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words which Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. Then Israel said, It is enough. Joseph my son is still alive. I will go down and see him before I die. So Jacob is stunned to hear Joseph was alive. It says, his heart stood still. Then later it says he revived. Maybe you've had an experience like that. You just have a shock that utterly shakes you to your very core. That's what's happening with Jacob now. He can't believe the words coming out of their mouth. It's hard for him to absorb the new reality that's being presented to him. It's interesting to me that he does not become angry. He does not chasten his boys here. We have no record of that. Perhaps he did do it, but there's no record of it. There's no indication of resentment or bitterness on his part. He's just simply happy to learn my son Joseph is still alive. And so he ends up going down to see his son Joseph. Now, chapter 46, verse 1, notice this. This is God dealing with Jacob again, but he's now being referred to as Israel. So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. So he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again, and Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. Now, when you read that, you have to be moved understanding what he's telling him. He had traveled at this point from Hebron to Beersheba, about 20 miles. He offered sacrifices to God. This is the place where Abraham offered sacrifices. Isaac offered sacrifices to God. And God appears to him, it says, in the visions of the night, and calls out to him, Jacob, Jacob. He gets his attention. He's wanting to give him some assurance here. I am the God of your father. The same God that spoke to Isaac was speaking to Jacob. Do not fear, he says. Abraham's experience in Egypt was not a good one in Genesis 12. Isaac was forbidden to go to Egypt in Genesis chapter 26. The prophecy had already been made back in Genesis 15 that their descendants would be there 400 years and be afflicted. And so there is some history as to why Israel or Jacob would be hesitant and apprehensive about going down to the land of Egypt. But he told him and he promised him, I'm going to make a great nation of you, of your descendants down in Egypt. It was a part of God's plan that had been revealed to Abraham and to Isaac before him, of course. The fulfillment of a promise of a great nation. You've got 70 persons going down into Egypt, and there are over 600,000 fighting men when they come up out of Egypt in the time of the Exodus, and you see them in the desert. In the book of Numbers in particular, you have this accounting of the men, both at the beginning and the end of that wilderness wandering, about 600,000 fighting men. And so you multiply that out, you get somewhere 1.5 to 2 million people who are that nation of Israel. He tells Jacob here, as he's headed down into Egypt, I will be with you. And he had told him before, when he had that dream at Bethel, as Jacob was on his way to the land of Haran, that I will be with you. Jacob knew God was with him in that time. And so he is reminding him, I will be with you. I keep my promises, and I will bring you up. Now, when he says, I'll bring you up out of that land, he's really saying that he's going to bring him out as a people, as a nation later, because Jacob's going to end up dying in the land of Egypt. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. But Joseph, he says, is going to put his hand on your eyes. That's a reference to Joseph being with him at the time of his death. You know, people, when they pass from this life, when they recognize they are near death, they want their family around them. And God is promising Jacob here, when it comes time for you to cross over, your son Joseph that you love, that you long for, is going to be there with you. What a sweet thought to have his favorite son with him at the end. So in 46, we read of Jacob's clan moving down into Egypt. We want to jump forward now a little bit to chapter 47 and notice Jacob before Pharaoh. In Genesis 47, beginning in verse 7, it says, Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, How old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. And Joseph situated his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Then Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with bread according to the number of their families. So here's Jacob before Pharaoh and blesses Pharaoh. And remember, the lesser is blessed by the greater. This Pharaoh sitting on the throne in Egypt, an extremely wealthy man beyond, I think, what we can truly comprehend. And Jacob, this clan leader from up in the relatively backwater Canaan land, a man who doesn't have a homeland of his own, is blessing Pharaoh because Jacob is superior to Pharaoh. Even though Pharaoh's the one on the throne, Pharaoh has the power, Pharaoh has the army, it is Jacob who's blessing him because Jacob is the Prince of God. And Jacob says he's 130 years old. He's had a few days compared to his forefathers, so we talked at the beginning of this episode. His days had been evil, multitude of troubles and sorrows, as we've noted many of those. Yet here he is now, having been reunited with his son and able to go into this land of Egypt during the time of famine and not just be provided for to get by, but to be abundantly provided for in the best of the land. God had truly watched over Jacob and been with him. Now, we jump to chapter 49, Genesis 49, and notice verse 1 says, Jacob called his sons and said, Gather together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. And this is just simply him giving prophecies about his descendants through his sons, what would happen, what would unfold. The fulfillment is mainly in the tribes of Israel once they're settled in the land of Canaan. There is a connection throughout all of these to the belief in and fulfillment of God's promises. And we're not going to go through all of them here, but we just want to note in verses 8 through 12 when he gets to Judah. It says, Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp from the prey. My son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion who shall rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. Binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. Now, there's a poetic element to this, of course, but the thing that we particularly want to get is talking about Judah and talking about the scepter and this idea of Shiloh. Judah, of course, at this time is really the leader among the brothers. Now, Joseph's the governor of the land, but among those brothers who are all living in the same area together, because Joseph is not at this time, but Judah is their leader. And he would continue to be a leader. His descendants would be leaders, particularly you think about the fulfillment of David coming to the throne, then Solomon, and then in the divided kingdom, there was always a descendant of David on the throne, and that means it was a descendant of Judah. And then coming from him, from that tribe, was Shiloh, the idea of the Messiah coming to rule and reign his people. And of course, that's fulfilled in the New Testament in Jesus Christ, who was of the tribe of Judah. But here's this prophecy being made. What a wonderful blessing. You just wonder what's going through Jacob's mind as he's speaking these things to his son. But we want to jump forward now, Genesis 49 and verse 29. Then he charged them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittites as a possession for a burial place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife, and there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is there were purchased from the sons of Heth. When Jacob had finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed and breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. It's such a poignant scene that's given to us there. How that Jacob charged his sons to bury his body in the cave of Machpelah, back up in the land of Canaan, back in that land that was promised to him and to his descendants. He notes that it was purchased by Abraham. And this was where Abraham and his wife were buried, where his father Isaac and his mother Rebekah were buried, and also where he buried Leah. So he's going to be gathered to his people, and it notes that he draws up his feet and was gathered to his people. What does that mean, gathered to his people? It's not just the idea of his body being carried back and put into a tomb where the remains of his wife and his parents and his grandparents were. It's the idea that he's gathered to them on the other side. He is brought back to them in that Hadean world, as the New Testament talks about, in the bosom of Abraham, or it's known as paradise as well, a place of peace and rest. Jacob had lived a long and challenging life, and here he is at the end of his life, surrounded by his sons, passing from this life into the next. In chapter 50, verse 1, Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for him, for such are the days required for those who are embalmed, and the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. Boy, does that tell you what kind of influence that Joseph and his family had on Egyptians of their day. They respected, they revered Jacob, the father of Joseph. So here he is. When his father passed, it says, fell on his face. He closed his eyes, just as God had promised him. In verse 4, it says, now when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, if I have now found favor in your eyes, please speak in the hearing of Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, saying, behold, I am dying. In my grave, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now therefore, please let me go up and bury my father, and I will come back. And Pharaoh said, go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. So he receives permission to leave the land of Egypt, to bury his father as he had committed to his father. Pharaoh respects that. And so he goes to do that. In verse 7 then, beginning, Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the house of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's house. Only their little ones, their flocks, and their herds they left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great gathering. Then they came to the threshing floor of attained, which is beyond the Jordan, and they mourned there with a great and very solemn lamentation. He observed 7 days of mourning for his father. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of attained, they said, this is a deep mourning of the Egyptians. Therefore its name was called Abel Mizraim, and is beyond the Jordan. So his sons did for him just as he had commanded them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite as property for a burial place. And after he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who went up with him to bury his father. It's a large group. There are state officials that have accompanied them. There are national representatives. They have a military escort, and then also the family of Jacob. And it talks about repeatedly these days of mournings and the lamentation. Let me just make a point here. So many people today, when they have a funeral, when they have a graveside service, things like that, they just want to go on and on about this celebration of life. That is not the point and the purpose of an occasion when you lay someone's body to rest. It's a time of mourning, of solemnity, a time of reflecting on our own mortality. I think there's a lesson to be learned there. And there's a lesson to be learned in the fact that they honored their father's request. This shows that they too have a measure of faith. Jacob is telling them, put my body there because that's the land of promise. That's the land that the Lord is going to give to his people. That's where we belong. And it's giving these sons of Jacob a reassurance and a reinforcement of the promises of God. To believe in those, to know that our land, our homeland, truly is Canaan. It's not Egypt, no matter how good it was. Remember, at this time, they have it pretty good in Egypt. Their brother is the governor of Egypt. They're in the best of the land. They have all the food they need. They have great possessions there. They have the good life, as good of the life as you could have. And they needed to be reminded, this is not where you're going to stay. This is not our land, the promised land. The promised land is back up in Canaan. And so they take their father to bury him there. And the record tells us that, of course, Joseph returns to Egypt. Let's reflect for a moment. Jacob was a man who knew the incredible value of the Abrahamic blessings. He valued God's promises and was determined to obtain them. Though he was not always upright in his dealings, he remained persistent in pursuing the Lord's favor. Through all of his own failings and the turmoil of his family, Jacob kept his eye on the goal and became Israel, the Prince of God. And through his descendants came the Prince of Peace, the Son of God. Let us learn from Jacob's life. We need to avoid the pitfalls of duplicity and favoritism and all the heartache and pain that brings with it. We need to tenaciously pursue God's favor with a humility and trust in the Lord. In spite of life's trials and the hurtful actions of others, we need to press on to gain the Lord's favor, to be in His favor. Not that He's in our debt, but that we are in His debt. He is committed to never leave us nor forsake us. And so we need to commit to never leaving or forsaking Him. As we keep our vow to honor the Lord, He will be with us and keep His promises just as He did with Jacob. And we will find our place in the promised land, the land of heaven, our place of rest, where we will be gathered to our people. Thank you for listening to the Law of the Lord podcast, a work of the Newton Church of Christ in Newton, North Carolina. Find out more about us on our website, lawoftheLord.com. Reach out to us with any questions or comments about this episode. We also welcome Bible questions that we can answer personally for you or address in a future episode.